Hi everyone, my name's Joel and I'm a product manager at R3. Today I'm going to be giving you a demo of the new metering functionality that's included in Corda Enterprise 4.3. So I've got a node here and I'm just going to kick it off. And this will start up an enterprise node running on a Corda Enterprise 4.3 distribution. So the node will start up and we'll hook into the node shell, and here we go. So one of the first things to point out here is that you can see we have the metering Cord app installed. So this is a regular Cord app. You download it and drop it into your node's Cord apps folder. The collection of the metering data itself by the node happens automatically. You don't need the Cord app for that. This Cord app is just there to allow you to collect the metering data. And so once we have that Cord app installed, we can see it in our list of installed flows. And so here we have our list of flows, and this is the one that we're looking at. So the metering collection flow. And if I hit flow start here, it'll give me a list of all the possible constructors. And so we have various ones, some useful from the shell, some less useful from the shell. And in our case today, we're going to use the second constructor here. So we're going to have to pass in a start date. That's the date from which we want to collect metering data, the number of days to collect, how we want to filter it, what we filter on, and the page number. So if I run that, I can say flow start, metering collection flow. Start date is perhaps when I'm recording this, so the 10th of November. Days to collect, let's say 5. And then I want to filter by. And here I specify how I want to filter what I'm collecting. And there's a few different ways to filter it. You can filter it by Cord app name. You can filter it by Cord app signing key. You can filter it by Cord app hash. Names is the easiest to do, so we'll do that here. And we'll just say Cord app names. And then I need to say what names I want to filter with. So I say filter, and this will be a list of Corda Finance demo in our case. So this is just a demo application we've used to generate some transactions. And finally, the page, I'm going to request page 0. So the results from this flow are paged, because in theory you could have thousands and thousands and thousands of metering results. And by default, you'll have 1,000 results per page, and you can page through those. But the flow will return an overall count across all the pages. So if we kick that off, if I haven't spelled anything wrong, that flow will run. And I can zoom in a bit here and take a look at what's happened. So again, this is a flow that returns the number of metering events that have happened on the node. And I can see here there are overall 14 metering events. And there's a version number there as well. Not too important for now, but we'll use this to version the metering data over time. And then we have the query. So the query just captures all the information from what we've just retrieved. So the start date, the end date, what we filtered on and how we filtered it, and then which page number we requested, and the number of total pages and the page size. And then finally, so we have our count up here, but we can also see details on the individual metering events. And here we can see an aggregated view across the different command types. So for example, here we have a transaction signed by the main node identity, standard transaction, so not a notary change transaction, for example, and the commands. And the command here is an issue command, and there's been 2 of those. And here we have a second transaction with the move command, and there's been 12 of those. So that gives you a bit of a breakdown of what metering data has been reported. So we just showed you how to collect the metering data via the shell, which can be useful. But because the metering data is simply collected by running a flow, you can also call that flow from other places and handle the results programmatically. So firstly, here we have an example of an Rpc client that connects to the node and then retrieves the data by calling the metering collection flow. So here you can see we have a client. We set up the connection to the client as usual, get an RPC connection to the client. And then we define our collection parameters. So here we're defining a duration. So we're saying we want to collect 1 hour's worth of data. We want to collect it starting 1 hour before the current time, instant now minus duration. And we want to filter it. So again, here we're filtering by Corda names, and we're passing in a list of the names to collect for, in this case, Corda Finance Demo. And again, here we could pass a list of several Corda names, or we could filter based on other attributes, which we'll look at in a second. And then finally, we're retrieving the first page. And then, just as we did with the shell, we're just kicking this flow off. So we're grabbing that RPC connection, starting the flow, and we're starting the metering collection flow, passing in a start date, a duration, a filter, and the page, and waiting to get the result, and then just printing that to the screen. So here we're just printing it, but you can also imagine if you had an RPC client from a server, you could present this up to the end user. You could process this data further. You could pipe it to some other application, and it's really up to you. And finally, here below, we have some examples of other filters. So here, we're filtering here by signing keys. So that's by the key that signed the Corda app. So if you imagine that the Corda Finance Demo, for example, is signed by this key here, then we pass in that key and say we want to filter on the signing keys. Equally, we can filter on the hashes of the Corda apps. So again, this is provided here. And then we can also imagine doing this from a flow. So here we have it's a custom flow that I've defined, this report metering data flow. And what it takes is this value, which is who to report the data to. And it also takes a few other parameters. So the parameters of the metering query, so when to start from, the duration, the filter, the page. And all we do is we override the function's call method to say start by calling a subflow, or start by calling metering collection flow as a subflow, pass in the query parameters and wait to get the response back. And then once you've retrieved that metering data, just create a flow session with the person you want to report it to and send them the metering data. So this is just a simple example, and you probably want to put more checks in place to check you're reporting to the correct person. But this is just to show you that it's a very flexible API. So we've defined metering collection flow, and then you can consume that and process the resulting data however you want. And if we dive a bit further into the definition of metering, so here we can see the data that's returned. So here we can see there is a total count, so the number of metering events, a version number, the details of the query, and the returned entries. So the entries are a list of collector and metering entries, and this is defined above here. And you can see there's a signing identity, the transaction type, the commands on the transaction, and the count. So the signing identity will be either an account identity, or it will be the node's main identity currently. If you sign a transaction with a confidential identity, the node's internal database will map that back to the main identity. Then we have the transaction type here, and there's 3 different transaction types, and it can either be a standard transaction, it can be a notary change transaction, or it can be another transaction type. And then we have the list of commands. So this tells you which command was used when signing the transaction, which commands were in the transaction. And you can see this is a list, so it could be several different commands. And finally, the number of metering entries. The other thing we can look at is this metering query. And again, this is what we've been using in the shell. This is what we've been passing to the flow. But again, just a start date, an end date, a filter, a page number, total number of pages, and a page size. There you go. So this is how the various data classes are defined. And then if we want to look at the flow itself, we can pull that up as well. And it's got a bunch of constructors, but it's just a regular Corda flow. It's an initiating flow that you can start via RPC, as we know. And here we have a start date, an end date, a filter, a page, and a page size. So there you go. So from Corda Enterprise 4.3 onwards, nodes will automatically collect metering data as they run. You don't have to change anything. They'll do that automatically. But then you also need to install this metering Corda app to retrieve and filter the data.